Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class on Uniqlo, supply chain going global. Now, when I was looking for case studies to teach in this class on global supply chain management, this particular case study caught my attention. And one of the reasons is that I am a customer of Uniqlo. I have purchased their goods. And what sets them apart is that they are a Japanese company. And within a span of just 20 years, Uniqlo has become the fourth largest global fashion retailer in the world. By 2015, this company had 1,550 companies. So within a period of 20 years, and 20 years is really not that very long, this company really has taken the world by storm. The CEO, Tadashi Yanai, is somebody who had tremendous leadership, and he brought in a lot of innovation, and he really made this company really prosper and become a leading fashion global retailer in the world. So just a little bit about my personal experience and about Uniqlo clothes. So as I've mentioned, I lived in New York City for a good 10 years, and during that period of time, I used to feel very cold in the winters, and the winters would last a good 9 months. And one day I had gone for exercise, and I heard somebody mention that they went to a store by the name of Uniqlo, and that it totally changed their life. That caught my attention. And so I used to exercise in an area called Soho in New York City. And so I went to the Uniqlo store that was there, one of their flagship stores. And what I found was something very interesting. They had very unique and innovative material. And so whether it was, the material, what I'm talking about, the specific material that I'm talking about is called heat tech. And so heat tech is a thin material. When worn, it is extremely warm. So it can be worn under, a sweater or under your, pants. And it just, the interesting thing about the material is that it's extremely thin and at the same time, very, very warm. So it really did change my life in New York, the quality of my life. And in general, what I noticed in Uniqlo was that it was, as I mentioned, a Japanese store, and, all the way from Asia. And yet it completely took New York City by storm, and it became very much appreciated across the US and across the globe. So, that's why for me, this company definitely stands out. And when I saw this case study, it caught my interest. I mean, how did this happen? There are so many boutiques, there's so many clothing companies, let's say in Pakistan or anywhere in the world. But what did they do, especially regarding supply chain management, that catapulted them into this success, this global recognition? And so, with you, I will go through this case study, and we will discuss, following the case study in our question answer session. We'll have a good discussion on this case study, hopefully. And yeah, so with that being said, let me start with right at the genesis, at the beginning of Uniqlo. So in 1949, there was a small family-run business in Japan, and it was known by the name of Ugari Shogi Company. And this company was basically selling ready-made men's suits. So what happened is that the owner's son, Tadashi Yanai, he took over the family business as the CEO in 1984. And he completely, his vision was different from his father and grandfather, who were making these very formal suits. And he came in 1984 and he said, you know what, I want to change what we're offering. I want to get into basic casual wear, and I want to change the name of the company as well and make it, you know, a brand by the name of Unique Clothing Warehouse brand. And so, you know, so he was given that creative freedom. In 1999, 91, sorry, the company changed its name and it became known as Fast Retailing Company. And so basically what they started doing is, you know, their company did start doing pretty well. And, you know, over, you know, good 10 years or so, they were able to build a very successful store in Japan and in urban Hiroshima. And in addition to that, they also made a, you know, a small roadside store, and that became very, very popular. So, you know, again, in 1998, after the success of the store, they rebranded themselves yet again. And for the first time, they began known as Uniqlo, and that became their name, which is, you know, it's still their name, and gained a lot of global success. So one thing that, you know, we'll be talking about as the case study, you know, continues, in 1998, something, in addition to their changing their name, there was another very interesting event that happened in this company, which was that they introduced a product by the name of Polar Fleece Jacket. And this particular product really became extremely popular. And this also sort of helped them with their brand expansion, and also it really made them the, you know, the #1 fashion retailer in Japan. So 1998 was a pretty significant year in this company's life. All right, so if we really look into what Uniqlo really stood for, what it was offering in the market, they were focused primarily on price and on quality. And they, you know, really did not rely on fashion trends. They had a counter current approach. They, you know, they did look at the fashion trends to a certain extent. They did rely on them, but not completely. Rather than that, they worked on research and development to make, you know, unique natural and synthetic textiles. And they also, you know, were very much in tune with customer feedback. And through that, they basically were able to develop various products that really were different and differentiated them, and they were highly innovative. And so that was their success. So there, you know, there are a lot of fast fashion brands, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the case study. But that wasn't necessarily exactly what they were doing. They had that aspect of looking at fashion trends, but it wasn't their primary focus. Their primary focus was, you know, bringing in price, quality, innovative products, a little bit of, you know, definitely they should be following the global trends, but it was a little bit, you know, it was a unique way offering that they had. And so they basically, their idea was that they would offer basic fashion brand styles. So nothing, you know, completely different or, you know, crazy in terms of the style. But what they would do is they would have, you know, so they definitely had their innovative cloth. But in addition to that, they also would offer standard kind of styles, but in a large variety of colors and quality of materials. So Uniqlo's unique position tried to position itself as the world's only lifewear brand. Lifewear means everyday clothes for a better life, high quality, fashionable, affordable, and comfortable. And I can definitely vouch for this. You know, my sister was studying in university at that time. You know, she would wear a lot of Uniqlo clothes. I would, and the reason being they were all high quality, fashionable, affordable, and comfortable. And that's a really winning combination that they were able to offer. So one thing about them is that they were the pioneer, or they did make the first, specialty store retailer of private label apparel. And basically what this means is that they had a very specific kind of a supply chain that was very agile, very quick. And they also had very tight partnerships with a select number of suppliers. And they had, they had long-term agreements with their suppliers. They were generally Chinese partners that they partnered with. And so again, if we look at the whole spa model, just to repeat that, it is, in a very agile supply chain model, one that changes according to the market very fast. um, and this same fashion model was also this sorry the same supply chain model of spa has been followed by a lot of fast fashion companies. So that's something to keep in mind. So they, the very quick reaction to what customers, changing demands, they would definitely respond to that. And also the fact that they had, very good, strong relationships with their suppliers. So one thing about Uniqlo was that, they really started off in Japan. They became a national brand in Japan, and they as and then eventually they decided to start selling globally. And obviously, initially it was difficult, and there were a lot of questions, because developing a local supply chain versus developing a global supply chain, and a very efficient global supply chain, has a completely different set of challenges. But this is something that Uniqlo was able to do extremely successfully. So here's just a little bit from the case study, sums up a little bit of what I was just saying right now. At first, Uniqlo was a casual chain on the back streets of Hiroshima. Then we became known as a national brand in Japan. So the next step is to become a global brand. We really have to transform this company to be successful and compete. Before, we manufactured in China and sold in Japan. Now we need to manufacture in the world and sell to the world. So this is exactly speaking to what I just mentioned, that, it's different when you have a local supply chain, and then it's very different when you start thinking, on a global level, and being able to sell all across the world. So, but this did not hold them back. There are a lot of companies that sort of hold themselves back. They feel that, what, it's just enough. Just the local market is enough, and they're making enough money. But this particular company, and the CEO really had his vision on bigger, he had a bigger vision, sorry. And so, I mean, that vision, forced them to take certain calculated risks, and those risks actually paid off extremely well. So if you look at, the apparel retail market, and you really sort of analyze what's been going on in the world, what's been happening is that, the region of Asia, there has been a growth of 9.5% in the apparel market, which is a pretty significant growth. So there's a lot more demand for high demand for clothes, and a lot of this demand has been coming from China. And about 1/3 of the demand within Asia has been coming from China for apparel. And it's a pretty big market. So the total market size of Asia in 2018 was $340 billion. So the reason that, China all of a sudden has had this increase in demand was that they had seen 30 years of, economic development. They had a big middle class, and that middle class is the largest in the world, mind you. And that middle class really wanted trendy, comfortable, affordable apparel. And so Uniqlo really saw this as a huge opportunity. a lot of the competitors, and you can see on this slide, they had entered China a whiles ago. So if you look at Inditex, which is also the parent company of Zara's, by 2014, they had about 500 stores in China. Gap, which is an American very famous brand, actually reduced their presence and reduced the number of stores in America and decided to expand in China. And another very famous brand, H&M, they opened about 80 to 90 stores in China in 2014. So looking at all of this and keeping all of this in mind, Uniqlo decided that, in around 2014, they decided to open, 340 stores of Uniqlo in China. And they also decided that they wanted to add 100 stores or so every year in China. And, this was a pretty aggressive uh, target. And so their aim was that, by 2020 they wanted 1,000 stores um, operating in China. And so this is something that, after their huge success in Japan, rather than going to the West, which would have, one would have thought maybe going to the US would have been their, on their strategy, or expanding to Europe, they actually did not do that. They decided to go to Asia. And this is something very interesting, because a lot of American brands nowadays, whether it's Starbucks or whether it's, we just, in this case study, it's mentioned, Gap, they've been reducing the number of stores in the US and expanding in China, because, that's where the money is right now. Another brand, by the way, before we move on from this topic, another very, prominent brand in the fashion industry, retail fashion industry, is ASOS. And they also had, they entered the Chinese market, and they basically they sell through the internet. So they sell through e-commerce. And so they were able to sell, 2,000 brands in China. So again, they were very much interested in entering the Chinese market. So you can see over here on this slide that, there's just a lot of international interest in entering the Chinese market. And so Uniqlo definitely decided to do that. Now, the case study also talks a little bit about two particular fashion brands. The number one, fashion brand in the world right now, and it has been for a while, is, Zara's, under the group name of Inditex. And so, there is a case study that I teach in Introduction to Supply Chain on Zara's, because of, they have a tremendous supply chain as well. And the thing that Zara's, that sets them apart, is that they introduced the whole fast fashion, in-season design concept. And so they considered clothes as, non-durable consumer goods, and they thought that these, clothes should have a shelf life of about 4 weeks in their store. And so they decided to introduce, the way they would work in this fast fashion model is that they introduce new designs weekly. And they would, monitor all fashion trends around the globe, and they would then make their designs accordingly. And they have followed a pull strategy rather than a push strategy, which had, prior to Zara's fast fashion model, the world had been, sort of using, in the fashion industry, there had been a push approach where, designs would be made well in advance, twice a year. There would be 2 collections a year. And then once, big stocks of these clothes would be made and then pushed to consumers. So, Zara's had a very different approach. Zara's also, owned 14 factories in Spain. They are very much technologically advanced. They had robots that work 24/7. They are highly innovative in their designs. 61% of their sales are fashion forward or in-season designs. And so that just gives you a little bit of an idea of, what Zara's is about. They also follow the SPA model, again, a very agile, supply chain that's very quick to respond to customer demands. And so this is something that following Zara's success, a lot of other fashion companies have started to have moved to this model of fast fashion. The case also talks a bit about another company by the name of H&M, and so sorry, this is all about those last two slides are all about Zara's, by the way, and so you can also read this a little bit more in detail, but just a couple of key points I will point out. Some things that Zara's did was they outsourced production. A lot of their production was actually being done in China. And they, for them, getting stores, getting, making smaller lots based on fast fashion and, sending it out really helped them reduce their inventory size, increase their reduce their cycle time. And again, they were able to restock their stores twice a week, which is, really, really impressive considering that they have global supply chains. All right, so as I was just mentioning a little while ago, the next company after Zara's that this case study really discusses a little bit is H&M. This is also a very famous brand name. It is a Swedish company. Their head office is in Stockholm, and they have about 100 designers and a head designer, and they also roll out a lot of fast fashion in-season designs, which is it accounts for about 80% of their sales. 60% of their manufacturing is done in China, and pretty much all of their manufacturing is outsourced to about 700 manufacturers, and they have 30 production centers owned by H&M. Generally speaking, H&M clothes have a longer shelf life as compared to other fashion retail outlets. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about H&M. So if you look at what Uniqlo does, their model is a little bit of a mix of H&M and Zara's. It's not exactly one or the other. So that's something to just keep in mind. All right, now after this, the case study really starts talking a little bit more about supply chain management. And this is where I feel it's a very interesting part of the case study, because here you start, understanding exactly what supply chain management steps the company took to help them catapult them into this, prime position of being the, fourth most successful fashion retailer in the world. So to understand exactly how they dealt with their local supply chain, and then eventually how they made it a global supply chain, how they managed it, we'll start right at the beginning. And so initially what Uniqlo did was, in terms of the supplies or the cloth that they would procure, they relied on Japanese trading houses. So for the first 10 years, and we're talking about 1984 to 1994, they really relied on a couple of top Japanese trading houses to help them source material at low costs from China. So they really couldn't go and source the material from China directly, because if you go and you try and source something from China, they usually have a very high minimum order quantity. And Uniqlo couldn't really afford at that time in the initial phase to buy from China directly. So they worked with a couple of leading Japanese trading houses. The other thing was that, in the beginning, they really didn't have any knowledge of, how to manage import and export and how to check the quality. So all of this was managed by the Japanese trade houses for them. And then, so time continued. And then by the time 1994 rolled around, 10 years of operation and, successful, very successful years, they had, sales of a $500 million. And after, at this point, the company decided that, look, it's they had enough cash, and that they wanted to take control of the supply chain and sort of learn how to do all of the import export, to deal with the Chinese suppliers themselves. And so initially, their trading partners were dealing with, about 100 different Chinese manufacturers. But in 1994, when Uniqlo decided to sort of take control of the supply chain, they, things changed a little bit. And once they started, dealing directly with the Chinese manufacturers, this helped drive down their prices. And so, over here, you can actually see one of their products, the jean jacket, one of Uniqlo's products, the jean jacket. And if you look at it, their prices versus their competitors' prices were significantly lower. So for the jean jacket, Uniqlo was charging consumers $24. And the Japanese Gap, so the Gap in the Gap operating in Japan was offering the same product for about $66. And there was another company, Matsuya, that was offering the product for $175. So again, they were offering good quality, but at very, very competitive prices. And so because this helped them sell a lot more and become more popular, they were able to open 50 new stores in Japan around 1994, around that period of time. And they continuously restructured their supply chain, and all of this they kept doing while keeping their quality very high. So up till now, in as far as the supply chain goes, we've seen how they started off relying on Japanese trade houses to source material for them. Then 10 years into the game, they gained enough confidence to sort of take control of the supply chain themselves, and this drove down prices, drove down their costs, and they were able to offer their goods on lower prices, and this became a competitive advantage for them. So this and following this, what Uniqlo decided to do in 1998 was that they actually made some production houses in China. So they actually established overseas production offices, and they decided to cut down the number of suppliers that they were working with from 120 to 40. So they actually decided to have a permanent presence in China. Being close to their suppliers, again, helped them make their supply chain even more efficient. So now that they had their production houses in China, and they were able to reduce their supplier base, one of the challenges was that they didn't have as many styles coming out as, let's say, Inditex or H&M. So they actually, in order to continue working with these very big suppliers, had to increase the average order size. So they had to give huge order sizes of, that's and the case mentions about 8.75 million pieces worth of orders to these suppliers, and this increased their inventory, but they were able to they had enough demand to be able to manage the situation. Now, okay, so we've seen now that they took control of the sourcing of the material for their goods, but obviously as they were expanding, the supply chain was becoming more complex. And so in 1998, in addition to sort of making these production houses, they also deployed and started their own IT system. And this was an internal IT system, and the whole idea was to increase their forecasting and inventory management. And they would look at the point of sale. So they would look at the sales data, and then they would through this IT system, they forecast a lot better and manage their inventory a lot better. Something else that happened in 1998 was, and this was something that I mentioned at the beginning of the case study, was that they were able to introduce a very cheap polar fleece jacket that became a huge, huge success for them. And with the introduction of this fleece jacket, their sales doubled in 2 years. And the reason that this polar fleece, which is again for cold countries, this polar fleece, again something very comfortable, affordable, being offered by Uniqlo, it had very good quality, and it was extremely cheap compared to all other similar products in the market. And so they actually, because of the success, they actually needed to expand their supplier base a little bit, because they just had so much more demand. Now, while after all of this was happening, let's say 2 years down the line, what they also wanted to make sure was that there was not a lot of mistakes being made in their factories. So not only were they sourcing in China, they were also getting their goods manufactured in China. And so this was one of the key reasons that they also had open production houses. But it wasn't just enough to sort of source and just outsource everything in China and just sit back. They had to make sure that everything that was coming out, everything that was being produced in China, had very good quality. And so what they did was, in order to ensure this, they made a team by the name of Takumi team. And this team was sent to all of the factories where their products were being manufactured. And the whole idea was, this team was responsible to do three basic things. Their basic responsibility was to focus on the quality of goods that were being manufactured, making sure that the raw material was correct, the production was state of art. But above all, they were looking at how to reduce defects, how to increase efficiency, and how to better coordinate the supply chain. And so this Takumi team had, extensive experience. They basically had, each one of the Takumi team members had up to 30 years of experience in garment production. So these were gentlemen that had just a lot of knowledge. And so when they would go in and they would see what was going on with the Uniqlo goods, they were able to, really help improve the processes and improve the final product as well, and improve the quality. So again, the benefits were the quality improved, and so did the efficiency of the supply chain. And this Takumi team, they would visit the factories, 2 to 3 times a week. They taught a lot of, Kaizen, which means continuous improvement philosophy, to people working in the factories. They tried to perfect pretty much every single phase of the supply chain and achieve just-in-time production methods. So, reduction in the inventory level, because, again, they were trying to just make enough to meet the demand. And also they wanted a very, to ensure that it was a very quick operational response to changes in demand. So they work particularly a lot with one of Uniqlo's big major suppliers, known as the Chefing Group. And at the Chefing Group, this Takumi team did 3 big things. They implemented 3 processes. The first one is that they analyzed every production process and they checked for quality issues. The second thing is they implemented a strict quality control to check for defects at every step. And finally, they did in-depth they implemented a staff training program. And this Takumi team would at the Chefing Group, they would handle problems daily. So they would inspect every single SKU. They would give demonstrations for factory workers. And another thing that they implemented was a one table meeting. And so basically they would have representatives from every manufacturing department attend this meeting, and they would coordinate production scheduling, and they would, do all of the scheduling of how they would meet, how the chefing group would meet Uniqlo's targets. And so this was done on a regular basis. And this helped, these kind of meetings helped improve the overall relationships throughout the organization. By the year 2000, again, through these kind of measures, Uniqlo was able to bring in a high level of quality, and their suppliers such as chefing were able to really meet Uniqlo's quality and cost targets. And so this is, again, very, very interesting story, because as we've seen so far in the supply chain, just to recap on everything that we've covered so far as the supply chain management goes, Uniqlo initially started off with manufacturing locally in Japan. That was stage one. Stage two was they started sourcing, they started getting things made in China, but they were working through trading companies. So they were sourcing material in China, and they were also getting their goods manufactured in China. The reason that they did not do it themselves directly and that they had to work through trading houses was because they were not able to buy in huge bulk quantity. It took them about 10 years time to really develop themselves at a point and have enough money where they took control of their own supply chain. Subsequently, they built, production houses in China so that they could go there, they could continuously sort of see how to reduce costs. They made a couple of amazing products in the meantime. Their jean jacket has been mentioned, the polar fleece has been mentioned. And eventually, they not only did they have their production houses, they sent in quality teams such as known as the Takumi teams to go and ensure that every single product coming out from the supply chains were really good quality. And also these Takumi teams went in to sort of try to understand how to further improve the supply chain practices. So that's a recap so far of the supply chain at Uniqlo. All right, so after doing a deep dive in Uniqlo's supply chain, we're now, the case study sort of moves towards understanding how Uniqlo evolved into this fashion as a utility concept. And so, the case study talks a lot about the fleece jacket, and something that was very unique about the fleece jacket was it was just very practical and very functional. And it was able to keep customers warm, regulate moisture and dryness. And this just became, such a huge success that I think it changed Uniqlo's direction to a certain extent. And so in 2003, Uniqlo decided to get into a partnership with a company by the name of Toray. And they decided to do something very interesting, which was to compose different material and to work on advanced fiber manufacturing. And this was, being done in Japan. And so as a result of this partnership, they were able to make a new product that was known as heat tech fabric. And this is something I mentioned to you right at the beginning of the case study. And so in 2002, they decided to introduce this thermal material and products made of this thermal material into the market. And these were designed for warmth. And so this was a huge success in countries that were very cold. And so, for example, in Europe and the US and Canada and all of these countries, there's Japan as well, very long winters. And so after making the heat tech, they didn't stop there. They actually kept on improving this new fabric with customer feedback. They also came up with yet another innovative product, which was the ultra light down jacket. So generally speaking, winter jackets are very heavy. And so they worked with Toray. They came up with this innovative new material, new style of of a very warm jacket, but it was very, very light for people to wear. And so this was something that became a huge success. Now, this all was great, but it did come with a little bit of a challenge. Toray, the company Toray told, was happy to work with Uniqlo, but they said that, look, they needed a stable demand. They did not really put their foot down. They said, look, we can't be having, variation in demand. So you try to figure it out, but give us a steady demand. And so Uniqlo decided to continue their relationship with Toray because it was so successful, but they had to manage their inventory and production schedule in a way that they were able to give Toray what exactly they needed, which was a stable demand. All right, next up, I'm going to be talking a little bit about inventory management and how Uniqlo managed this, their inventory successfully. So generally speaking, the inventory was carried over, from one year to another only for year-round items. If there were in season sort of fashion-forward kind of items in their stores, those products were not carried forward. They were just kept for that season and discontinued after that. Inventory was updated in their systems on a daily basis, so they knew exactly how much they had in stock, and they could plan accordingly. Any inbound store logistics, so anything that was, had to be sent into different stores, this aspect they decided to outsource this. So they had a third party that was able to sort of do all of their inbound store logistics. So bringing things in the store, making sure that the products were you're stocked up, all of that was done by a third party. One thing that Uniqlo did successfully in order to manage their products was that if sales targets were not reached for various products, then they would decrease the prices. So they would wait for 2 days and they would check, okay, let's say the sales target was 100. If they were able to sell 100, fine. But let's say they were not able to sell 100, so they would wait for day one, and after 2 days, if they were still not able to meet the sales target, then they would make sure that the prices were reduced. Something else that they did that helped manage inventory was that they developed a device that allowed all staff to basically, and this device, they made it in collaboration with Microsoft and Casio, and they made this, handheld device that every, salesman had. And through that, they were able to check if a customer needed something and it wasn't um, in the store, they were immediately able to check from the handheld device if they had any inventory on hand, the prices of various goods, the availability. And so they had a central database. And so all the information was taken out from the central base, given on the handheld device. And so this really helped, improve sales, and also, if any customer had any questions, answering those questions. So overall, this handheld device had a very positive impact. Now, in this particular slide, which is from the appendix in the case study, you can see that, calculated risks that Uniqlo took paid off very well. And so here you can see that their net sales, there's been just a steady increase in their net sales throughout. Um, and whether it was management of, so they were doing several things that really helped them catapult them into a global brand name, and that too a very successful one. So far, the case study really talks a lot about innovation, R&D, research and development, not just about, they didn't follow the herd of just everybody following Zara's or H&M. They came up with their own strategy. It was a unique strategy, and that was something that was not being done by other competitors. They started looking into research and development, coming up with different material, and they also decided to make a lifestyle brand. It wasn't necessarily what Zara's was doing or H&M was doing. This was something very unique. They wanted to bring comfort at affordable prices, trendy, But above all, the whole idea of making day-to-day life more comfortable for for their customers was something that really drove their success. Additionally, they worked with Chinese manufacturers, but they didn't just outsource and that's it. They did not let go over there. They did outsource, but they kept a very close watch and they integrated their own people into the supply with the suppliers. They had a very collaborative approach with the suppliers, and this helped them really increase their sales and improve. Now, next, I'm going to be discussing a little bit about Uniqlo's production outside of China and their distribution networks for online retailing. So, in 2008, Uniqlo decided that they wanted to relocate one third of China's production by 2020. And so they decided to outsource to Bangladesh and to reallocate their production to Bangladesh. And they made a joint venture in Bangladesh. They only had a 10% stake in that joint venture, but they definitely decided that they didn't want to sort of just focus on one country and have, that's a high risk situation. So they decided to diversify and move some of their production to Bangladesh. And one of the reasons, number one was, of course, if you just are working with one country, the risk is high, but also there were rising wages in China. And so they decided that, look, in order to keep their costs low, they should also be looking at other countries. So they also shifted some of their production to Vietnam. Now, so that's a little bit about their production outside of China. Now, if we look at their distribution strategy, this was basically being done through another company by the name of Daiwa Group. And so their distribution strategy, Daiwa Group, they basically built, these huge distribution slash warehouses. And they had, first, so this Daiwa group had first tier warehouses, and these were the warehouses that would receive goods from factories. And they had second tier warehouses, and these would distribute products directly to shops. So they had these two-tiered, um, warehouses within that were working for Uniqlo's brand. So that was their strategy for the physical stores, working through this Daiwa group. But as far as e-commerce goes, I mean, that had separate challenges. And so their aim in general was, Uniqlo's aim was to give, one-day delivery for their e-commerce websites. Um, they were working with JD.com, which is stands for Jingdong, which is an e-commerce, a site in China. And so again, their aim was to offer, one supply goods to in within one day to their customers. So a little bit about some, their distribution has been mentioned in the case study. I'm just going to read it out for you. Once it's completed in spring 2016, we Uniqlo plan to develop our new state-of-art distribution center in Arake, Tokyo, into the world's largest digital flagship store. We intend to carve new business by combining our virtual storefronts, online retailing, with our physical store network in such a way that enhances their mutual functionality and makes buying clothes an even more pleasant experience for customers wherever they are and however they choose to shop. So again, the whole idea of making big, developing their own distribution center sort of came in the forefront as well. So if you look at in general Uniqlo's trajectory, whether it's the supply chain or distribution, they start off with, it seems like, with outsourcing some of these functions, but eventually once they gain a little bit of knowledge and confidence, they try to take ownership of these functions. And you can see that Uniqlo is moving in that direction as well. Uniqlo, now one thing towards the end of this case study, that comes up is that, look, Uniqlo did extremely well in Japan and the Asia market, but they wanted to really sort of make it a global brand, and they also wanted to enter the US market. And so in 2006, they started off their first store in the US, in New York, in the Soho district. And that's the store that I went to, actually, and I mentioned at the beginning of the case study. And by 2014 to 2016, sorry, there's a little typo over here, they opened a lot more stores. And so in the US, they opened about 15 to 22 stores per year. And their end aim was a target of 200 stores in the US. And this is something that they work towards. Couple of things they did have to change when they entered these new markets. They for example, the sizes of their clothes had to change. The Asian sizes were different from the sizes in the US, and so those were certain things that they definitely had to change once they entered new markets. But their supply chain, they it worked, because they had done the background work. They had a good strong hold of their supply chains by the time they entered these markets. And so they had streamlined their processes, and there were no major problems. Um, Tadashi Yanai, the CEO, regarded the development of the US market as a big pillar of Uniqlo's expansion strategy. And they had a goal of developing Uniqlo's USA into a 100 billion yen operation. Uniqlo seemed, and so again, a little bit in the case study about, aims and ambitions going forward. According to the case study, fast retailing is keen to pioneer a new industry which is completely different from the apparel, fashion, and retail industries as we know it today. This will require fundamental review of our entire supply chain. We have already established R&D centers in Tokyo, New York, and Shanghai. Now we are looking to promote full-fledged product development in Paris, London, Los Angeles, as well as opening additional R&D centers in these three cities. And so with this, you can see that Uniqlo continues to evolve, develop, innovate, change, and it's continuously moving forward. And this kind of ideology, in my opinion, is what has helped it become one of the biggest brands in the world. And with that, sorry, just before I end, this idea of continuous improvement is, again, it goes back to the Kaizen, which means continuous improvement philosophy. And another big thing that it should be mentioned is that Uniqlo's strong dedication to quality is also something that has helped it become one of the biggest brands in the world. With that, I come to an end to this particular class. I would strongly suggest that you look at the appendices in these, and the case study gives you a lot more information about the business model, and other things that of interest. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to an interesting question and answer session with you soon.